In August 2024, construction workers demolishing an abandoned textile factory in Kaufbeuren, Bavaria, discovered something that stopped the entire project. While excavating the basement to prepare for foundation removal, a backhoe operator felt unusual resistance at a depth of 4.5 meters. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a reinforced concrete structure extending another 8 meters below the factory floor. When engineers breached the sealed entrance on August 19, they found a fully equipped underground laboratory containing rocket engine test equipment, advanced aerodynamic models, classified technical documents, and a workbench with a nameplate, Dr. Werner Hartmann, Entwicklungsingenieur, Peenemünde 1943. Dr. Werner Hartmann was one of hundreds of German rocket scientists who worked at Peenemünde, the Third Reich's secret weapons development facility on the Baltic coast. Official records listed him as killed during an Allied bombing raid on the base in August 1943. His name appeared on casualty lists. His family received notification of death. American intelligence officers who swept through Peenemünde in 1945 found no trace of him among the scientists they captured for Operation Paperclip. But the laboratory beneath the Bavarian factory told a different story. Hartmann hadn't died in 1943. He'd faked his death, built a secret research facility, and continued his work long after Germany surrendered. The technical documents found in the lab were dated as late as 1951. For at least 6 years after the war ended, a dead Nazi scientist had been conducting advanced rocket research in the heart of Bavaria. These hidden chapters of history only come to light when people refuse to accept the official version. Werner Hartmann was born in 1908 in Munich to a family of engineers. His father designed industrial machinery. His grandfather had worked on early automotive engines. Werner studied aerospace engineering at the Technical University of Berlin, graduating in 1932 with a dissertation on supersonic aerodynamics that caught the attention of military researchers. By 1935, he was working at the Army Weapons Office on experimental rocket propulsion systems. In 1937, he transferred to Peenemünde, the newly established research center where the Third Reich was developing long-range ballistic missiles. Peenemünde was where Wernher von Braun and his team created the V-2 rocket, the world's first large-scale liquid-fuel ballistic missile. It was also where thousands of slave laborers died building those weapons in underground factories. Hartmann wasn't part of von Braun's inner circle. Declassified personnel files from Peenemünde, examined by researchers in 2024, showed that Hartmann specialized in combustion chamber design and fuel mixture optimization. He held patents for several innovations in rocket engine cooling systems. His work was technically brilliant but politically marginal. He attended Nazi party functions when required but showed little ideological enthusiasm. His performance reviews described him as technically competent, politically reliable, personally reserved. By 1943, Peenemünde was under increasing Allied surveillance. British intelligence had identified the facility's purpose, and bombing raids were inevitable. On the night of August 17 to 18, 1943, the Royal Air Force launched Operation Hydra, a massive raid involving nearly 600 aircraft. The attack killed approximately 735 people, including scientists, engineers, and forced laborers. It delayed the V-2 program by several months but didn't destroy the facility. Official records stated that Dr. Werner Hartmann died during that raid. His body was reportedly identified among the casualties and buried in a mass grave at the Peenemünde cemetery. His wife, Greta, received notification on August 25, 1943. She applied for a widow's pension and raised their 2 children alone in Munich. Except Hartmann hadn't been at Peenemünde on the night of the raid, and the body identified as his belonged to someone else. The laboratory discovered in 2024 contained a detailed journal, written in Hartmann's handwriting and confirmed through comparison with authenticated technical documents from Peenemünde. The journal began with an entry dated August 10, 1943, 1 week before the bombing. Received orders to transfer sensitive materials to secondary facility. Classification: Geheime Reichsake. I am to supervise the relocation personally. Departure scheduled for August 16th. The timing is suspicious. Someone knows the British are coming. Hartmann had been ordered to evacuate critical research materials from Peenemünde days before the raid. The order came from SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, the officer responsible for the V-2 production program and later for managing various secret weapons projects. Kammler was preparing contingency plans, distributing research across multiple facilities to ensure that if one site was destroyed, the work could continue elsewhere. Hartmann traveled to southern Bavaria on August 16th, escorting 3 trucks loaded with technical documents, prototype components, and test equipment. He arrived in Combustion on August 18th, the same day Peenemünde was bombed. His journal entry from that night. Heard about the raid via radio. Casualties are significant. I should return, but my orders are to secure the materials here and await further instructions. Part of me feels relief at being away. Part of me feels like a coward. Hartmann's orders were to store the materials in a warehouse owned by a textile company with military contracts. The company's owner, Friedrich Bauer, was a Nazi party member who had connections to SS procurement networks. Bauer provided storage space and, as it turned out, much more. The journal described Hartmann's growing realization that returning to Peenemünde might not be possible or advisable. The raid had drawn intense Allied attention to the facility. Security would be tighter. Questions would be asked about who had been absent during the attack. And Hartmann had another problem. He'd taken more materials than his orders specified. I brought additional documents that were not on the manifest. Technical specifications I'd been developing independently. If I return, they'll discover the discrepancy. If I report it, I'll face investigation. The safest option is to remain here and claim I was killed in the raid. On August 24th, Hartmann learned that a body had been identified as his at Peenemünde. A worker who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, approximately the same age and build, burned beyond recognition. Officials had used personal effects found nearby to make the identification. Hartmann's workshop had been in the bombed sector. The assumption was logical, though wrong. Hartmann made his decision. He wrote, "If they think I'm dead, I'll stay dead. The war is lost anyway. I can see that now, even if the leadership can't. When Germany surrenders, the Allies will seize everything from Peenemünde. They'll take the scientists, the research, everything. But if I'm already dead, they won't come looking for me." With Friedrich Bauer's assistance, Hartmann began constructing his hidden laboratory beneath the textile factory in September 1943. The journal documented the process in meticulous detail. Bauer hired construction workers from outside the region, paying them well and ensuring they signed secrecy agreements backed by threats of SS enforcement. The workers excavated beneath the factory's basement, creating a space approximately 12 meters by 8 meters, lined with reinforced concrete. The excavated soil was removed gradually, mixed with regular factory waste to avoid suspicion. Electrical power was tapped from the factory's main lines through concealed conduits. Ventilation was routed through existing factory exhaust systems, making any unusual airflow undetectable. The entrance was concealed behind a false wall in the basement storage area. Construction took 4 months. By January 1944, Hartmann had a fully functional laboratory hidden beneath an operating textile factory. He moved his equipment, documents, and research materials into the space and resumed his work. What work? The journal revealed Hartmann's obsession: developing a more efficient rocket engine design that would use less fuel and produce more thrust than the V2's motor. He believed he could improve on von Braun's work, creating an engine that would be crucial for whatever came after the war, whether German victory or Allied occupation. He worked alone, conducting calculations, building scale models, and occasionally fabricating small test components using the factory's machine shop at night. Bauer provided cover, telling workers that the basement was being used for classified war production that they weren't cleared to know about. In wartime Germany, Nobody asked questions. Hartmann's isolation was nearly complete. He couldn't contact colleagues without revealing his survival. He couldn't publish research without exposure. He worked in secret, driven by a combination of scientific passion and the realization that he'd trapped himself in a situation with no easy exit. The journal entries from 1944 showed increasing psychological strain. 6 months underground. I emerge only at night, walking the factory grounds briefly before returning. I am a ghost. Technically alive, officially dead, practically imprisoned by my own deception. But he continued working. His technical notebooks, recovered from the laboratory in 2024, showed steady progress on his engine designs throughout 1944 and into 1945. Germany's collapse in May 1945 created a new crisis for Hartmann. American forces occupied Bavaria, including Combustion. Allied intelligence teams were actively searching for German scientists, particularly those involved in rocket development. Peenemünde personnel were being rounded up for interrogation and potential recruitment into American programs. Hartmann faced a choice: reveal himself and likely be recruited into Operation Paperclip, joining former colleagues working for the Americans, or remain hidden and hope the occupation forces wouldn't discover his laboratory. He chose to stay hidden. His journal entry from May 10, 1945. The Americans are here. They've occupied the factory. Bauer is cooperating fully, showing them the textile operations, the machinery, everything. They have no reason to suspect what's beneath their feet. I will wait. When things stabilize, I can decide what to do. But waiting became permanent. The American occupation forces converted the factory to produce textiles for military use, then eventually returned it to civilian operation. Bauer maintained control, continued protecting Hartmann's secret, and provided food, supplies, and materials smuggled into the laboratory. Hartmann's existence became a bizarre routine. He lived underground, worked on his designs, and occasionally met with Bauer to discuss the outside world. He followed news through newspapers and radio that Bauer brought him. He learned that many Peenemünde scientists had gone to America, including von Braun, who was now developing rockets for the U.S. Army. The journal showed Hartmann's conflicted feelings. Werner is in America, building rockets for the people who bombed our cities. I could be there too, if I'd made different choices. Instead, I'm here, under a factory, working on designs nobody will ever see. Have I wasted everything? Or preserved something important? He continued his research through the late 1940s. The technical documents showed refinements to engine designs, experiments with new fuel mixtures, and theoretical work on multi-stage rockets years before such concepts became standard. Hartmann was producing cutting-edge research in complete isolation, with no peer review, no collaboration, no connection to the scientific community he'd once been part of. The journal's entries became less frequent after 1947. Hartmann was aging, his health declining from years of underground living with minimal sunlight and exercise. But he worked compulsively, as if his research was the only thing giving his life meaning. A 1949 entry showed awareness of his situation's absurdity. I am 41 years old, officially dead for 6 years, living in a hole beneath a factory, designing rockets that will never be built. If this is madness, at least it's productive madness. The last dated entry in the journal was March 15, 1951. Friedrich brought news. The Americans and Soviets are both developing long-range missiles now. The work we began at Peenemünde is continuing, just under different flags. My contributions are buried here, unknown and irrelevant. Perhaps that's appropriate. I helped design weapons that killed thousands. Maybe obscurity is the correct punishment. After that, blank pages. The 2024 investigation team faced the question: what happened to Werner Hartmann after 1951? Factory records showed that Friedrich Bauer died in 1953. His son, Heinrich, inherited the business but had no knowledge of the laboratory's existence. The secret died with Friedrich, and the entrance remained sealed behind the false wall for 71 years. But what about Hartmann? His journal ended in 1951, but when did he die, and where was his body? The laboratory contained no human remains. Forensic teams searched thoroughly, checking for concealed burial sites or any sign of death within the space. They found nothing. Researchers examining Kaufbeuren municipal records discovered a curious entry from June 1951. A John Doe death was recorded at the local hospital. An elderly man, approximately 40 to 45 years old, had been brought in suffering from severe malnutrition and pneumonia. He had no identification, couldn't or wouldn't speak, and died within 24 hours of admission. He was buried in an unmarked grave at the municipal cemetery as unknown male, June 1951. The description matched Hartmann's age. The timing aligned with his final journal entry. The cause of death, malnutrition and respiratory illness, was consistent with years of underground living in poor conditions. Did Hartmann finally leave his laboratory in 1951, too ill to continue, and die anonymously at a hospital? It's the most plausible theory. He would have emerged after 8 years underground, disoriented and sick, unable to explain who he was without revealing his entire deception. Hospital staff would have had no reason to suspect he was a supposed dead scientist. In 2024, researchers requested exhumation of the unmarked grave. German authorities approved the request in October. DNA analysis is scheduled for early 2025, comparing genetic material from the remains against samples from Hartmann's descendants, his grandchildren, who are still alive. If the match is positive, Werner Hartmann's death will be officially redated to June 1951, and his body will finally be identified 73 years after burial. The technical documents recovered from the laboratory were examined by aerospace historians and rocket engineers. Their assessments were striking. Dr. Michael Neufeld, a specialist in German rocket development at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, reviewed Hartmann's work and stated, "These designs are remarkably advanced for their time." Hartmann was working on concepts that wouldn't become standard in rocket engineering until the 1960s. He was essentially conducting independent research that paralleled early NASA and Soviet work, but without any knowledge of what they were doing. Several of Hartmann's engine cooling designs were similar to solutions later developed for American Redstone and Atlas rockets. His fuel mixture experiments anticipated approaches used in later Soviet engines. Whether these were independent inventions or whether Hartmann had stumbled onto optimal solutions that others would later rediscover remains debatable. The tragic irony is that Hartmann's isolation prevented his work from having any impact. If he'd surrendered in 1945 and joined Operation Paperclip, his expertise might have accelerated American rocket development. If he'd published his findings after the war under a pseudonym, they might have influenced the field. Instead, his research sat in a sealed laboratory for 73 years, unknown and unutilized. Dr. Neufeld noted, "This is a waste of talent, but it's also a cautionary tale about secrecy and isolation. Science advances through collaboration and peer review." Hartmann cut himself off from that process, and his work became irrelevant, not because it was poor quality, but because nobody knew it existed. The moral questions surrounding Hartmann's case are complex. Unlike many scientists at Peenemünde, he wasn't directly involved in the use of slave labor or the targeting of civilian populations with V-2 rockets. His work was purely technical, focused on engine design rather than weapons deployment. But that technical work enabled the weapons. The V-2 killed approximately 9,000 people, mostly civilians in London, Antwerp, and other cities. The rockets were built by concentration camp prisoners working in horrific conditions, with thousands dying from abuse, starvation, and executions. Hartmann's combustion chamber designs made those rockets more effective. Does technical distance from atrocities reduce moral responsibility? The journal showed Hartmann grappling with this question, particularly in his later entries. I designed engines. I didn't target cities or enslave workers. But my engines powered the rockets that killed civilians and were built by slaves. Where is the line between technical work and moral culpability? I don't know. I suspect there isn't one. His choice to hide rather than join Operation Paperclip might be interpreted as moral calculation. The American rocket program employed former Peenemünde scientists who had direct knowledge of slave labor conditions. Some had actively participated in selecting prisoner workers. Yet they received American citizenship, comfortable positions, and contributed to the space program that put men on the moon. Hartmann could have had that career. Instead, he chose 8 years in a hole beneath a factory, followed by anonymous death in a hospital. Was that conscience? Cowardice? Simple miscalculation? The journal offers no definitive answer. Hartmann was conflicted, recognizing his complicity but also rationalizing it. He was a man trapped by choices made in fear, unable to find a way forward that satisfied both his survival instinct and his conscience. Friedrich Bauer's role raised additional questions. Why did he help Hartmann hide for 8 years? The journal mentioned payments. Hartmann had brought money and valuables when he fled Peenemünde, and he paid Bauer for food, supplies, and silence. But was it purely mercenary? Factory records showed Bauer had been investigated for war profiteering in 1946 but never charged. His company had produced uniforms and supplies for the Wehrmacht using materials that likely came from confiscated Jewish property. He was complicit in the regime's crimes, even if not directly violent. Helping Hartmann hide might have been simply another transaction for Bauer, one more secret to keep in exchange for payment. Or it might have been ideological, protecting a German scientist from Allied capture. The records don't clarify his motivation, and his son Heinrich, interviewed in 2024, stated his father never discussed the matter. Heinrich was shocked by the laboratory's discovery. "My father ran a textile factory. That's what I knew. I had no idea there was anything beneath it." He never mentioned Hartmann, never suggested anything unusual about the basement. When he died in 1953, I inherited a business, not a secret. The false wall that concealed the laboratory entrance was discovered only during demolition because it was structural, designed to bear load and appear as part of the original construction. Workers in the factory for decades never suspected anything unusual. The 2024 discovery forced aerospace historians to reassess assumptions about German rocket scientists after 1945. The standard narrative held that they either joined Allied programs, fled to South America, were captured by the Soviets, or died during the war's final chaos. Hartmann represented a category nobody had seriously considered: scientists who went into hiding within Germany and continued working in secret. Were there others? Researchers began examining similar cases, unsolved disappearances of German scientists whose bodies were never confirmed. Preliminary investigations identified at least 12 other instances where scientists from Peenemünde or related programs were declared dead, but where evidence was ambiguous. None have been definitively proven to have survived, but the Hartmann case demonstrated that official death records from that chaotic period couldn't be assumed accurate. Someone with resources, connections, and willingness to vanish could do so successfully. The laboratory beneath the Combustion factory has been preserved as a historical site. The German Federal Archive has taken custody of Hartmann's documents and technical notebooks, which are being digitized and made available to researchers. A small museum exhibit opened in November 2024, titled "The Hidden Engineer, Werner Hartmann and the Secret Laboratory." The exhibit includes Hartmann's workbench, preserved exactly as it was found, with calculation papers still spread across the surface. The nameplate reading Dr. Werner Hartmann, Entwicklungsingenieur, Peenemünde 1943, is displayed prominently. His journal sits in a climate-controlled case, open to the final entry from March 1951. Visitors to the exhibit often ask the same question: was Hartmann a victim of circumstances or an active participant in his own isolation? The exhibit text offers no answer, presenting the evidence and letting visitors decide. The DNA results from the unmarked grave are expected in February 2025. If they confirm the remains are Hartmann's, his family will have the option to rebury him with a proper marker or leave him in the municipal cemetery. His grandchildren, now in their 60s and 70s, are discussing what to do. One granddaughter, Petra Hartmann Koch, told reporters, "I grew up believing my grandfather died a hero's death in 1943, killed during an Allied raid while working to defend Germany. The truth is more complicated and sadder. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who made bad choices, lived with the consequences, and died alone. I don't know if he deserves sympathy or condemnation. Maybe both." The technical work Hartmann produced in isolation remains a footnote in rocket development history. It was competent, occasionally brilliant, but ultimately irrelevant because it existed outside the networks that actually built the rockets of the 1950s and 1960s. His research might have made a difference if he joined Operation Paperclip or found a way to publish it. Instead, it gathered dust in a sealed laboratory while others independently developed similar solutions.